the system was getting large enough that it really needed to have the full-time administrator in place and not just be a portion of a treasurer tax collector's job.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean you're still a county employee then, or?
Yes, I'm a part-time employee. The retirement administrator, when we hire a full-time one later this year, will be a county employee.
And how much is that going to pay?
The salary has been set at $125,000, and
where do you get the application?
It's coming out shortly.
Great.
Actually.
Okay. Are you going to apply for that, or do you know yet?
I will not.
No, you had enough.
I'm phasing into retirement.
Looking forward to gardening and walks on the coast.
Right.
Okay, John, did you have any questions specific on the spinoff? I know that one of the issues that happened about the time of the spinoff, or the independence of the retirement system, was looking at how to fund the unfunded pension obligation, and there was a bond spinoff, I believe, at one point. Is that taken into consideration in any of this? Does that help the county in the liability issues, or is there any ramifications?
Are you talking about the pension obligation bonds that were issued a number of years ago?
Mm-hmm.
It did save the county a considerable amount of money. That's why it was done. Originally, they did a pension obligation bond in 1996. Should explain, whenever there's an unfunded liability and the county has to pay on that, they have to pay at our assumed interest rate, which is currently 8% a year. And in 1996, the county went out and found that they could issue bonds. They're taxable bonds, so they're not quite as, the interest isn't quite as low as our municipal bonds. But they could still issue bonds to help pay down the unfunded liability at considerably savings over the 8% that they would have to pay the retirement system. And then the same thing occurred. We issued a $36 million bond at that time in 1996. Then in 2002, the unfunded liability had grown again, and it was really favorable to issue additional pension obligation bonds because interest rates were at an all-time low. Mm-hmm. And instead of paying the retirement system 8%, they were able to borrow money at overall, over the life of the bonds, about 5.7% on average.
And why is there an unfunded liability? How did that develop?
We have an actuarial report done every year, and the actuaries take all of the information on our employees and current retirees, and again, using the 8% as the assumed rate, they establish the present value of those future liabilities, and they set the salaries that the rates that are applied against salaries to deliver enough money to pay the current obligations and pay down any unfunded liabilities. But they're just making an attempt at coming up at a rate, and they don't always hit the right rate. So.
Because they're basically guessing about how much money is going to come into the system from how many people retire or work for the county, basically?
Guessing how many people are going to retire is probably the largest thing, and you can never tell. With the baby boomers coming into retirement age, we're going to see a lot more retirees coming on board than we have in the past. Other things, there were some retirement benefit enhancements that were done in 2003, and that we're just getting the effects of. Different things like that. It's also affected by our return on our investments. Mm-hmm. We use a 5-year smoothing on our return on investments to kind of stabilize the county's and employee, or just the county's contributions. And
so is that smoothing an actual physical smoothing, or is that just a paper smoothing?
Paper.
I mean, so you don't actually have someone who's insuring you for overs and unders? And,
no.
Okay, so it's just on paper.
On paper, right. And actually they smooth gains and losses above or below our assumed 8% rate.
And do they guarantee that, or that's assuming you're not cashing out on the pension funds, right? So there's actually no money there to cover those smoothings, is that right?
It's what they're doing is when they're doing the 5-year smoothing is, again, they've calculated the the liabilities that are required to cover all the retirement benefits for all the retirees and employees. To do the 5-year smoothing, they're trying to come up with the assets that are matched against those liabilities in order to develop an unfunded liability. Mm-hmm. So just to pick some numbers out of there, if our liabilities are $400 million and our assets are $350 million, we have a $50 million unfunded liability.
And is there a current unfunded liability?
There is. We're about 88% funded. I think it's just around a $30 million unfunded liability.
And are there state and federal laws on what needs to be funded, and is that coming up soon, or how do you actually fund it 100%, or do you need to?
Well, we have an amortization period that we started back in 1992-93. It was a 25-year amortization of the unfunded liability, which basically said 25 years from the fiscal year 1992-93, we have to be 100% funded, and that's our target now.
So as far as your performance in the market goes, how have you weathered the kind of ups and downs that have happened in Wall Street? I know you have a 5-year smoothing, but if that's just on paper, what happens if your portfolio is not performing as good or better than the index?
Well, then the unfunded liability grows.
So it would grow. And
yes,
has that happened this past week?
Well, we don't do it on a weekly basis,
right,
of course.
Right.
We're in here investing for 50 years at a time.
Right.
We did have some really bad years, and I think it was mentioned earlier, 2000, 2001, and 2, that area, about a 2.5-year period where we had actually negative returns on our investments, and they're all in the 5-year smoothing. And I think here we are coming into 2008. We're pretty well out of the years where we had negative returns on our investments.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in a period, I think, with 2008 where we should have gains for all 5 of the years, as opposed to some losses that we were working with.
Mm-hmm.
Our call-in numbers are in Philo, area code 707-895-2448, or 1-800-499-7117. And once again, we're talking to Tim Knudsen, longtime treasurer of Mendocino County and currently the interim retirement board administrator. Tim, let's talk about some of those negative years. Why don't you just run them down for us? I guess the last big blowout was during the dot-com era. Is that correct?
Yes, I think it started late 2000 and went through 2001 and 2002.
And how bad was the bloodbath?
Not well. I like to think because we're pretty well diversified, and we only have about 4, 6, 7% of our investments in the small cap area, which I think a lot of the new dot-commers were located. About 7% of our portfolio is in the area that was hurt. So we weathered the storm fairly well, I think. All the retirement systems suffered, including CalPERS. They lost a huge amount of money when you look at it on a dollar basis.
Oh, it's for sure. CalPERS is not the gold standard. I'm sure you're well aware that CalPERS just fired their CEO and chief investment advisor in the last month.
I'm aware that the chief investment or the CEO left. I wasn't aware that he was fired.
Well, they draw your own conclusions. They underperformed. Show me the money or take a hike.
Mm-hmm.
So Tim, in a lot of county contracts, most of the stuff goes out to RFP. Has there been any discussion about portfolio management going through the RFP process to see if we can get better returns on the investment? I know the county's pretty conservative on its investments and kind of the way things move, but has there been any discussion about that?
On management of the portfolio?
Either management or gauging it on something like portfolio performance, not commission necessarily, but